Welcome in, everybody, to a special nighttime edition of Birds 365. John McMullen joining now. He was down at practice all day today. Johnny Mac, how you doing on this Tuesday night, man? First day of pads. It's a celebration in the city when the pads come on at training camp. How you doing, John?
Doing well, except my wife evidently moved around a bunch of crap, so trying to figure what she did. But anyway, that's technical difficulties. Yeah, I mean, it's always a big day. You know, I think a lot of people, if you go back, I talk about it all the time. If you go back to the spring and Bobby King calling it Pajamas Day and N'Kobe Dean yesterday, had mentioned, you know, it's cute when you have T-shirts and shorts on, but it's not real football. Real football means pads. As much as they try to take it out of the game, you can't take it out of the game. Or if they do, you know, we'll be talking about flag football down the road. But when the pads come on, it makes a big difference. And you get to learn a little bit about the players who don't sort of excel in the spring because you need that physical nature to their job. So offensive linemen, defensive linemen, linebackers, running backs, etc. This is their time to shine. And today was day number one.
Yeah, day number one in pads, big day, as Johnny Mac mentioned. We will get into everything. John was our eyes and ears here on JAKIB Sports down there at practice, so he was able to take it all in firsthand. This is not secondary information. This is not reading reports. This is Johnny Mac right here, live and in person after being down there. So we'll get into the offense, the defense, the players that stood out. We'll talk about it all. John, real quick, though, let's get to the update on what happened this afternoon. The Philadelphia Eagles signed a veteran offensive lineman, Nick Gates, and they waived cornerback Mario Goodrich. What do you know about Nick Gates, if anything at all? What can you tell us about the signing the Eagles made this afternoon?
Well, he's a veteran guy, quite a bit of playing time over the years with the Giants and Commanders. He's trying to make that run through the NFC East, evidently. This will be his third team and all of them in the NFC East. He started 39 career games. So, you know, and he was the starting center for the Washington Commanders last year. You know, he played okay. I think he was graded out number 17 by PFF. So right in the middle of the road. Ultimately, though, they're looking to go in a different direction with the younger players. So, ultimately, there's a ceiling there. And always when you have a player like that who's sort of competent, but maybe doesn't have the biggest upside in the world, that's what teams try to do. So another addition to the interior, which, you know, it piqued my interest from the standpoint of the Eagles are dealing with some injuries, obviously. Not only the obvious ones, Tyler Steen with the ankle and Landon Dickerson went down today. We'll talk about that. Brett Toth, we talked about, had the hamstring. But, you know, it's a little bit concerning that if you think about Matt Hennessy and you think about Nick Gates and you think about Max Sharping, all very similar. And it's like you start to think to yourself, boy, they must not be all that enthused with some of the younger, inexperienced options for depth. At least that's the first thing that kind of crossed my mind. Or even a worst case scenario is some of these injuries are a little bit more concerning than the Eagles may be letting on, which would even be worse. But is a veteran guy. I mean, it's not somebody who hasn't played. So again, at this stage, you're not going to get all pros. But if you're not confident in maybe Dylan McMahon stepping up as a 6th-round pick or on and on and on, you got to get that veteran depth. But it seems like the Eagles are, you know, going overboard. And you have to ask the question, why? Why are they going overboard? Are they not happy with Matt Hennessy? Are they not happy with Max Sharping, but they cut Mario Goodrich? So they got all these guys, and there's only a certain amount of reps to go around.
We'll see how it plays out. Eagles, as we mentioned, Eagles signed a veteran offensive lineman, Nick Gates. Johnny Mack just broke down. So we will continue to prod. We will continue to figure out the answers to those questions that Johnny Mack just brought up. But interesting that they made that signing this afternoon. And then Mario Goodrich on the outs, as Johnny Mack mentioned. The Eagles waived cornerback Mario Goodrich. So Johnny Mack, let's move on into the practice today. Everybody's excited. Everybody's hyped. The pads came on, as you mentioned. It introduces a different element to training camp. As exciting and as much as we've learned from the first 4 practices, you learn a lot more when the pads come on. Before we dive into offense, defense, specific players, what were your first takeaways from the first day of pads popping down at the NovaCare complex?
Well, we finally got to see some red zone work, so that was exciting. That was always a day one proposition under Nick Sirianni, and a little bit of a shift with Kellen Moore taking over the offense. It's kind of weird to go through 4 practices and not see any red zone work, but we got a whole bunch of it today. Maybe they were waiting for those pads to come on. So that's a little bit more exciting for the fans, because the fans that are there, because they get to see some touchdowns. And obviously when you're working on a short field, you're more apt to score touchdowns. So that's a little bit more exciting for them. And then just the general nature of what I said about certain positions, and you start to figure out, all right, who can do what? Are they going to be able to hold up and run support on the defensive end? How's Mekhi Becton going to handle right guard, especially when the pads come on? You see the athleticism of somebody like Jaylen Carter. You're going to know pretty quick. So, yeah, it's and when the coaches would hesitate in spring and about certain players and bring up that, we got to wait for the pads to come on. It does get frustrating at times, but it's real, because as N'Kobe said yesterday, we play football in pads, not in T-shirts.
Yeah, so definitely makes a big switch, for what it is. John, the big storyline of the day seemed to be Quin Mitchell again continues to make headlines coming out of this training camp. I view it as a great thing. What did you see from that matchup today at Quin versus AJ, and just what you saw from Quin overall in practice today?
Yeah, it was great because they matched him up in one-on-ones again. So that's the second time. So obviously that's just not, it's not working out.
You were onto something when you said that was intentional, right?
They want to see what Quin can do, and he did well again today. He tremendous coverage on AJ Brown on 1 rep, and afterwards he kind of stood there and stared at him as to taunt a little bit, which is all in good fun from the standpoint. He's such he's such an understated guy, and AJ talked about this before. He didn't say anything to him when he got here, because he was a rookie and maybe a little bit shy, and you see an all-pro player, and all of a sudden he got on the field and he stopped AJ once and he said, "Trash route," if you remember that. Yeah, and AJ's looking at him like, "What?" And so he's got that competitiveness, and you saw it again today. And that was funny because that was the first rep. Then the second rep, AJ made this ridiculous circus one-handed catch. Now, ultimately, he was out of bounds, so he was ruled out of bounds, so it didn't count. It was red zone, so it would have been a touchdown. Phenomenal catch, but it was out of bounds. We were right there on the end line, and the Eagles had real officials in today, so they made the right call. But yeah, those two going together against each other has been one of the funnest things about training camp. And when I've been so high on Quin Mitchell, that's part of the reason, because he's, no matter what they throw at them, and they're throwing everything at him. And he talked about this after practice. Again, every single position, corner, slot, dime, they've thrown every single position at him, and they're giving him AJ Brown in one-on-ones. So that tells you they're preparing, and I've said it pretty consistently. It might be outside corner, it might be the slot, but he's going to be on the field. He's going to be a starter week 1 against the Packers.
Good stuff from Quin Mitchell. John, let's continue to dive in. Michael Clay spoke this morning. The injury update, Lane Johnson was back out there. Saquon Barkley was back out there. What's the update on that stuff with the injuries, and then just the takeaway from Michael Clay's comments on the special teams?
Well, a lot of heavy kickoff return because of the uncertainty of what's going on with the kickoff and the new kickoff rules and XFL inspired. And he mentioned he's going to have and every special teams coach is going to look at Thursday night's game and say, how are they doing it? And you're going to look around, and everybody's watching XFL film, how to best handle this situation. Ultimately, I think if you have a good returner, I think there's still going to be a lot of touchbacks. The NFL says no. They believe over 50% of the kicks will be returned. Originally when they put this rule up for debate, they were going to penalize a touchback to the point it was coming out at the 35. And the NFL didn't think it could get the rule passed with that because that's a pretty stringent penalty. And they moved it back to the 30. So now it's, instead of the 25, it's the 30. And if you got a really dangerous kickoff returner, like I'm talking the Devin Hesters of the world, the Cordero Pattersons of the world, you're not going to give up 5 yards for a chance to let that guy return. I don't think so. So we'll see how it works out. But my personal opinion is there's going to be still a whole bunch of touchbacks, especially if somebody gives up a big return early.
Yeah, I thought Michael Clay sounded good at the podium for what it's worth. John, let's dive into the injury update, though. Lane was back out there but didn't participate in team drills. And then Saquon was back out there. But anything else notable in the injury front?
A little surprised Lane came back so quick at all, to be honest. So, I don't. But Landon left practice, and he didn't go inside. He came out of the injury tent. He still had his helmet. And he went back to the sideline with his teammates, his offensive teammates, but never came back into practice. And then all of a sudden, they're signing Nick Yates after the practice. So hopefully that's not a bad omen. I don't think they would have let him stand out there if there was any danger of it being somewhat serious, but we got to wait and see. And obviously the Eagles are no media availability tomorrow in advance of Thursday's practice at Lincoln Financial Field. So we probably won't know until Thursday about what's going on with Landon. But that's got to be at least a little bit concerning. Saquon missed Monday's practice because of a personal issue. So no injury related aspect to that. So he was back. Although I got to tell you, man, they did a lot of red zone work, as I mentioned today. And they really used Kenny Gainwell more than they used Saquon Barkley. And I hope for Eagles fans' sanity that doesn't continue, because they will lose their minds. But they like Kenny in the red zone. And he had a great day, by the way, really. And Kobe Dean had a difficult time dealing with him as a receiver in the red zone. But yeah, a little bit strange there, but he was back from a health standpoint. It's interesting because the guy who replaced Landon Dickerson at left guard was Trevor Keegan, and he was limited. He was listed as limited with a shoulder injury, but he gutted through the rest of the practice. So that's probably a positive for him as a rookie player to be able to do that. And Oren Burks is still out. Got to mention him. And that's, the longer he's out, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. looked good. Had a big stop on Ty Davis Price. Showed his instincts, which we talk about with him, even though he's a little bit undersized. And then Ben Van Sumeren's, I got him making this team now. Ben's going to make this team. So how many linebackers can he keep?
Yeah, we're going to see how it all plays out. And welcome everybody in tonight, a special nighttime edition of Birds 365, 6 to 8 p.m. tonight. We'll be live for the next hour and 42 minutes, give or take, somewhere in that range. Johnny Mac joining. He was down there at NovaCare Complex today. I'm going to welcome all of our live viewers in today. A good crowd here at night. Make sure you guys drop a like on the show. I see you, Pete Nathan. He says, is this live? This is live, brother. We are live for a nighttime edition. So welcome everybody in. Rick, Yale, Pete Nathan, Philly, Twiz the Jig is in here. All of our good viewers, all of our loyal Madness is in here. All of our loyal listeners are here. Johnny Mac, they're ready to see what went on at practice. John, let's dive into the offense a little bit. Jaylen Herz. Let's start with Jaylen Herz, quarterback one. Pads come on. How did he look today out there at practice in the first day of pads on?
Yeah, he's had a good camp. We've talked about it pretty consistently, and that continues. It's been a little bit less impressive over the past 2 days, but I think that's more so because of the issues on the offensive line and some of the injuries and some of the guys being out. And the defensive front has really stepped up from a pressure standpoint over the last 2 days. So, anytime, look at Tom Brady in the Super Bowl, anytime you get pressure on a quarterback, doesn't matter who you are, that's going to have an effect on you. So, that's what's happened over the past couple of days, that defensive front has started to impose its will a little bit. And that's a good sign, I would say, from the defensive perspective, because that group's going to have to carry, the defensive side back to the Jim Sports days of being the so-called engine of the defense. And they've looked very good over the past 2 days.
Positive stuff continues to come out of Eagles camp. John, how about the wide receivers today? What did we see from them? I thought I saw some interesting storylines. Johnny Wilson was being used a little bit down there in the red zone. Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown. What did you see from the wide receiver group today in their first day of pads?
Well, Devontae and AJ are incredibly boring because they're incredibly good.
Yeah,
so
they're
that
so
never
damn good. You know what you're going to see.
Yeah,
Every day.
that sort of doesn't waver from day to day, and that's a very good thing. But I mean, I can talk about it every day and say, hey, they're really good. But it's sort of like a default setting at this stage. And then the Eagles are taking a long, hard look at John Ross, and can he rescue his career? Because like everybody else, they fall in love with his traits. And they're pretty spectacular. But he's been around since 2017, hasn't done much in the league. There have been late bloomers in the past. They generally don't tend to be at receiver, though. So I don't know. Howie was pretty honest about that position before training camp started, and said they'll be looking very, very closely at it, and that's a potential place they can go outside the organization for a somewhat meaningful move down the road if they start getting a little bit more uncomfortable. I don't think it hurts to try to use Johnny Wilson's size in the red zone occasionally, but I don't think
How does he look though,
gonna.
John? Does he look the part? Does he look, uncomfortable? How's he look when he's out there at camp?
He's not ready. I mean, he's a 6th-round pick. I don't think he should be ready at this stage. I don't think that's a bad thing. But none of the other receivers, some of the future signings that the Eagles trumpeted up, Jacob Harris, Shaq Davis, Austin Watkins. Austin Watkins did a little bit on Monday on the third team, showed a little bit. Maybe he'll start getting some reps. And obviously they want Johnny Wilson and Anaya Smith to succeed as draft picks, but boy, you better hope they don't have to play. That's where I am with those guys.
Yeah, we'll see how it all plays out. John, let's move to the offensive line. I think where you're really going to start to learn a lot more with the physical nature of the game, with the pads coming on. Mekhi Becton was in there at right guard again. Fred Johnson, who was playing the team drills for Lane Johnson on the right side. What did you see from the offensive line today with the first day of pads? Any physicality breaking through? I know you mentioned Landon Dickerson got banged up a little bit as well.
Yeah, so, Keegan was in there. Cam Jurgens is doing a good job. They did one-on-ones for the first time between the offensive and defensive linemen. That's usually a drill that's easier for the defense to win than the offense. And he stood up Jordan Davis, which is pretty impressive considering his size. But by all accounts, Cam's going to bring more strength to the position than maybe Jason Kelsey did. Really strong guy. So he looks good. Fred Johnson has not looked good, but, it's difficult to live up to the standard of Lane Johnson. He did have probably the biggest pancake block, the most physical play of practice on Zach Bond. And Zach got kind of upset by it, and Fred just kind of laughed at him. So he did show up his, size a little bit. He's a huge guy. Mekhi's been a work in progress. If he gets his hands on you, he's going to move you because he's just a big, big, powerful guy. But, when Jaylen Carter gets those movements going, and that freaky athleticism, he's having a difficult time. But everybody has a difficult time against Jaylen Carter. Kind of Reggie Whited him in one-on-ones, just throw him to the side, which if you think about, he's throwing a 365.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So that's a work in progress. Obviously, Trevor Keegan stepping in for Landon Dickerson, that's a bit of a downgrade. So
a bit of one. I mean, did he look okay? Because look, he's a guy. He's another 6th-round draft. I think he was a 6th-rounder, right?
Fifth. He's a 5th. He's
5th-rounder. Yeah. So I mean, look, I liked him coming out of college, but obviously he's no Landon Dickerson. How did he look out there?
He looked like a rookie. And remember, Landon started camp not practicing because of a lacerated toe, which he insists he did not get on the slip and slide. But anyway, he wasn't practicing, and Becton was playing left guard. And then he's back, and now Tyler Steen's out, and Becton's at right guard. So, he started out as, at best, the third team on the third team, and now he's taking first team reps because of the injury situation. So against a group that, and it's not only Jaylen Carter because Jordan Davis is playing well, Milton Williams playing very well. So those guys have been dominating over the past 2 days, and it's mainly because of those moving parts at the guard position, I would say.
John, we're going to move into the defense here, get an update on Quin, the cornerbacks, the defensive line you just briefly mentioned with Jaylen Carter. Anything else on offense you feel the need to mention that we might have missed just in our brief overall recap here to start the show?
Well, I mentioned Kenny. Kenny had a good day. Sorry.
Yeah.
I know people don't want to hear that, but he had a good day.
Yeah, I saw Andrew DeCecco also agreed that Kenny Gainwell was looking really good today in practice.
Ty Davis-Price not looking good, especially as a receiver, had back-to-back drops. So that's going to be a concern. He's got to fix that pretty quickly because it's evident. Will Shipley's really been a nice surprise. Played well when Saquon was gone for that personal day. and continue. I think he's gaining some confidence, and you can see when he's confident, he's a better player. And I think he's starting to realize, you know what, I belong here. So, that's for long term, obviously not right now, but he's turned it on because he had a tough start in way back in OTAs, and he looks like a guy who's already settled down and all of a sudden realizes that this isn't too big for him.
Good stuff to hear on Will Shipley. John, motion, big part of the offense down there in the red zone? I read a little bit about that today.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a big part. Kellen Moore believes in motion. You don't have to worry about that. There's going to be motion. The concerns are, is it going to be effective motion? Is it going to help the team? You got to worry probably a little bit more at false starts. They had a bunch of false starts on day one, and then Jordan Mailata and Cam had everybody running gassers, and they cleaned it up. They had a couple false starts today with the real officials there. So, stuff like that's you got to keep an eye on. But, yeah, you no longer have to worry about motion. It's going to be a part of the offense.
Good stuff. Any positive returns from the motion that you've seen, or too early to tell on that front?
Too early to tell. I mean, they relied very heavily on the quarterback run game today in the red zone, which it's been effective. I mean, Jaylen Herz has 28 touchdowns or whatever it is over the past 2 years. It's been very, very effective. They were very effective on quarterback draw. At one point, CJ Gardner-Johnson, because they were down, I was right on the end line behind the end zone, and when the defense was trying to hold them out. And CJ is known for his energy and trash talking. So he would get excited when Jaylen would take a covered sack or something like that. And he got very excited. He's like, you can't run it 100 times. Gonna have to throw it. So that's what CJ was trash talking about that. So they relied very heavily on the quarterback run game. And again, maybe that's what they were practicing. You don't go in. Practice isn't an evolving situation where you're going, oh, I better, when people talk about adjustments in game, you don't do that in practice. You're trying to work on certain things. So they were trying to work on it.
Let's get to the defensive side of the ball, John. We'll start with the defensive line up front before we get into the corners. I know Quin Mitchell made a lot of headlines today, and we'll dive a little deeper into him. But what did you see from the defensive line? I mean, I read a little bit about Jaylen Carter just tossing dudes out of the way. But what did you see from the D-line? There's obviously a lot of sights set on a lot of these guys, Bryce Huff and Nolan Smith, Jaylen Carter, Jordan Davis, all these guys. And when the pads come on, you get a chance to see more of it. What did you see from the defensive line today out there at practice?
Yeah, I said, I mean, they've been great over the past 2 days, really.
Yeah.
Part of that has to do with the injuries, as I said, on the offensive line. But Jaylen Carter's had a very good camp as a whole. He's good no matter who's out there. Jordan Davis. But some of the other guys have stepped up. Nolan Smith yesterday, specifically against Fred Johnson. Milton had a big day today. Some of those other guys are stepping up maybe when the talent level gets a little deficient on the other side of the ball. And, those guys can make some plays. But Jaylen and Jordan have been pretty consistently good. I think the only questions with them are conditioning related, where the Eagles have been very focused on. And can they play well? Can they play the 50th snap like they play their 5th snap and with the same effectiveness? To date, they haven't been able to do that. They got to get to that level where they're able to do that.
Yeah, and you're not going to find that out really at practice.
No.
So we'll see how those guys continue to develop in camp and into the season. So we'll continue to monitor those guys. Johnny Mack, let's continue to run through the defense. What did you see from Nolan Smith today? Anything positive? And then the other guy, John, I haven't heard anything about him other than his little press conference. Is Josh Sweat? Anything from Josh Sweat in camp so far?
Yeah, Josh has been good. Josh is another one of those guys. It's about, last year, I think it was pretty evident that he fell off when he started to play an enormous amount of snaps, way over his career high, and, wasn't prepared for it. But I think his demise was greatly exaggerated. He's always been a good player. He continues to be a good player. Is he going to be a Pro Bowl player? And that's where Nolan Smith and other people helping and maybe shaving off his rep count will help. So, one guy actually Bryce Huff hasn't done much, and I'm a guy who's high on Bryce Huff, and maybe that is why Vic spoke the way he spoke, because hadn't been great. I haven't seen a lot of zero. He's wearing zero this year.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a ton coming from him, and that I'm not going to say it's worrisome at this point because we're still very early in the process. But if we're getting to mid-August and it's the same thing, and you might start thinking about, oh, what's going on here?
Hopefully we hear a little bit from Bryce Huff. I mean, you were a guy that was high on him, rightfully so. He had some good stats, and some of those percentages I think were very positive, but not a whole lot coming out from him in camp so far, as Johnny Mack points out. Anything negative on him, or just hasn't made a play?
Just nothing terrible, but nothing great. And same thing with the secondary, really. Still, we're through 5 practices. They don't have an interception. They should have had one today. Kelly Ringo just dropped one in 7-on-7. I mean, Jaylen didn't see him, didn't know he was there, threw it right to him, and just dropped it. And then Mekhi Gardner almost got one in the developmental period, but he bobbled the ball. He caught it, but he was out of bounds. So still no interceptions through 5 practices. And that is rare because practice is not a game. So often quarterbacks are trying to throw passes that maybe they won't throw in a game to see where they can go and how far they can stretch things. And there should be quite a few interceptions by this point. And remember, it's not only Jaylen Herz, it's Kenny Pickett, Tanner McKee.
All right.
Nobody has thrown an interception in practice. That is of concern to me, Sander Krause.
Yeah, nothing from the defensive backs. Yeah, John, let's just stay there before we go to the linebackers and wrap up our opening. We'll get to our first break coming up soon after we get this overall recap of the day done. But, what else did you see from the corners today, or at least from a depth chart standpoint? Who lined up where? I know Isaiah Rodgers was out there on the other side of Darius Slay. Quinyon Mitchell started out in the slot. A lot of rotation with these guys, just giving you guys where they started. But what did you see from a rotation standpoint from the cornerback?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I kind of hesitated. I tried to hesitate people on that. Ringo had started 3 consecutive days at right corner. And now Rodgers was back. It's, there's no rhyme or reason to it.
Yeah, Vic is throwing everything out there, Johnny Mack.
And the real numbers, the rep count, and they're both getting significant reps. And they both ultimately also move over to the left side and play there behind Darius Slay at times. So it's one of those things where he's trying to look at everybody at every position and see who the best people are for those situations. But you do know the main corners are going to be obviously Darius Slay, Quin Mitchell, Isaiah Rogers, Kaylee Ringo, and Cooper DeJean when he comes back. So that's 5 right there. And then you have to start thinking about how you want to go, how many young corners you want to keep. Do you want to keep Avonte Maddox? They're trying him at second team safety now to see if he's valuable there. Same thing with James Bradbury. So a lot of questions to figure out for Vic Fangio. And they got a lot of D-back, but they lost one. Poor Mario Goodrich got waived to make room to sign the other offensive lineman. But they have so many corners. It's like some of these guys on the back end of the roster, like Mario Goodrich and even Zach McPherson, are not really getting an opportunity to compete. But, maybe how we can get something for them down the road. But Mario Goodrich on waivers, we'll see if somebody picks him up because a lot of teams looking for cornerback help.
We'll see how it all plays out. Johnny Mac, let's move into the linebacking core. What did you see from the linebackers today? It was Devin White and Zach Bond to start, but obviously still a lot of rotation at that position. Anything stick out to you at the linebacker position with the first day of pads?
Yeah, because we saw red zone work. I think for the first time we saw Devin White not on the field. We saw a package where it was Nakobe Dean and Zach Bond together. And yeah, I'd like to be in Vic's mind and say, well, what's this package? So, I've said this pretty consistently about the linebackers. You've heard me. I mean, they're all kind of the same. So I get it from that perspective. You're not going to see a deep fall off from Devin White to Nakobe Dean or from Zach Bond to Ben Van Sumeren. And even if you want to go down to Trotter, I think he's got a chance to play in the second half of the season because he's instinctive, and why not? Why not?
I've read some other reports from your other beat reporters down there that he looks pretty good. I mean, doesn't look great, but he doesn't look bad, which I think is a good thing when you think about where he is and where he was drafted and the experience he has. So we'll see how that position continues to play out. John, before we move into our first commercial break, and I'll get a couple thoughts on the press conferences if anything stood out there. Anything else on the defense that we missed in the overall recap of the day on the defensive side of the ball?
Just the safety position. That's probably been the steadiest position. There's no question, despite every story that comes out, the Eagles are a fit for Justin Simmons.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that later because I was getting asked about that earlier, and I was pushing back. I don't want Justin Simmons, but everybody wants him, Johnny Mac. He's going to be the cure-all for the Super Bowl defense. I don't see it, but we'll talk about that later.
I don't see it coming. Yeah, maybe an injury. Boy, I don't know. And I have no idea what Justin's thinking. I assume he still wants a significant salary. If he comes way down on the salary, I guess that can change it. But they like CJ and Reed Blankenship. And those are your starting safeties. So come to Jesus with it.
How'd they look today? Good?
Well, they've been... So again, the deep, there's no interceptions. And as I said, and CJ's known for being a playmaker. I think that's something to keep an eye on because he might start getting frustrated. They play too deep 90% of the time. And by too deep, I mean, that's where they start before they spin off post snap to what coverage they're getting to. But they start out in a too deep look 90% of the time. Had to change a little bit in the red zone today because obviously you have the condensed space. but for the entirety of camp, just 2 safeties in the parking lot. So, they're playing conservatively. So you might have a conservative defense.
Yeah, it's the Vic Fangio scheme, right? I mean, take away the big play and give them underneath a little bit. That's what we're playing. So, you've mentioned you don't love the scheme, but that's the scheme. They're not changing the scheme. We've seen it for years. We know what it looks like. So they're not changing that. John, let's move into the press conferences real quick. Before we take our first commercial timeout, I want to thank everybody real quick for being in here on the show. Good crowd here tonight on the nighttime edition of Birds 365. If you're enjoying the show, we would love it if you dropped a like on the show. Up to 59 likes so far. Let's get to at least 100 during the live show. So we appreciate all you guys being here. 59 likes. Can we get to 100 likes? We appreciate that very much. John, let's go to the press conferences. Anything stick out from the press conferences? I thought Quin Mitchell again. He just sounded good up there. I just loved what he had to say with A.J. Brown and, competing and stuff like that. But outside of that, anything else stand out to you in the press conferences or your thoughts on Quin as well?
Well, I mean, Cubby spoke. Cubby's really impressive. If you saw him, he's always impressive. He was talking about, he's been generating a lot of separation. I always talk about, I've seen his notebooks as a returner and his attention to detail and how much he works at the preparation aspect. And if you kind of listen to him today, he watches a lot of Cole Beasley, a lot of Danny Amendola. He knows what he is as a receiver, and that's a traditional slot. So it becomes, is he going to get an opportunity? Because the Eagles have kind of talked about needing somebody who can move around a little bit more. Now, Britton, of course, has confidence in himself, and he claims he can do it, but I'm not sure you want him playing outside the numbers. So I don't know if he'll get a shot, but I it's pretty consistent that other than Devontae Smith, who's a phenomenal route runner, everything about him, and obviously AJ, nobody gets more separation than Britton Covey on this team. Nobody. But he's pigeonholed.
Use him, baby. Come on, Kellen. Put him out there.
And Jaylen Herz trusts him. He's mentioned that in the past. And he kind of lobbied to get him on the field last year. And they didn't listen. So we'll see. I don't, I think it's hard when you see him because he doesn't look like a football player. And he jokes about it. He's trying to, the fans that are there chant for Jaylen and everybody else and all the stars, and they think he's the backup kicker. But he can play, man. And Nick talks about it all the time, called him a weapon. Be nice to get him out there and at least see, because it's not like and he's a very smart, he's very intelligent. He understands his roles better than anybody else. He explained the whole situation perfectly. I mean, so he essentially said, if you think about this offense, you've got AJ and Devontae and Dallas and Saquon. So the third receiver that's out there needs to be able to basically affect the game in other ways than just being ball centric. For obvious reasons, because you're not going to get a lot of traffic. So in his case, Paris and Paris Campbell, John Ross have tremendous speed, so they can affect things that way. From his perspective, he can affect it in his route running and his ability to create that separation. And, he just hopes he gets a chance.
We'll see how it all plays out. Johnny Mac, good breakdown there on what you saw at the first day of padded practice. So a lot of good things coming out of padded practice. We'll take our first commercial break. I got a good show planned. We're going to talk about the development of the offense with Kellen Moore, the defensive progress in camp, talk about our rookies a little bit. We'll talk about Justin Simmons a little bit. I can tell which way Johnny Mac's going to go with that already. We can keep it brief, Johnny Mac. We don't have to touch on it too much. What the schedule is moving forward and what to look for moving forward. So a lot of good stuff planned here on our nighttime edition of Birds 365. I want to thank all of you guys for being here on the show, supporting the show with the comments, the likes, the subscribes, the shares. We appreciate all you guys. Let's take our first commercial break. Stay tuned. Birds 365. We'll be right back.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.